Welcome back to Healing is a Messy Bitch. I'm Amy Wilhelmy, and we're talking about clinician burnout and renewal and integrative self-care for therapists. So it's something we're talking about that doesn't always get enough attention in conversations about mental health care, and that is the well-being of the therapists themselves. Now, if you've ever been in therapy, you may have noticed something interesting. Therapists spend a lot of time talking about self-care with clients. We talk about sleep, boundaries, eating, emotional regulation, stress. And all those conversations are important. But there is a slightly ironic reality in the therapy profession. Therapists are very good at encouraging each other and encouraging other people to take care of themselves, and sometimes not quite as good as doing it themselves, which is understandable because therapy can be incredibly meaningful work, but it can also be emotionally demanding. One of the central parts of therapy is listening, really listening, not the kind of listening that we do while half checking our phone and thinking about dinner. Therapeutic listening requires attention, empathy, and emotional presence. Therapists are holding space for experiences like trauma, grief, loss, fear, shame, relationship pain, sometimes for many hours in the day. And while that work can be deeply meaningful, it also has an emotional impact. There's actually a term for this. It's called secondary traumatic stress. Secondary traumatic stress refers to the emotional strain that can occur when clinicians are repeatedly exposed to other people's trauma. Even though the therapist did not experience the trauma directly, hearing those stories can affect the nervous system. Another related concept is compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue describes a form of emotional exhaustion that can develop in helping others. It happens when people spend a long period of time caring deeply for others without adequate emotional replenishment. The therapist may still care about the clients, but they may begin to feel emotionally drained, or numb, or disconnected. Sometimes clinicians noticed that their empathy feels harder to access. Sometimes they feel physically exhausted at the end of the day. Sometimes they find themselves thinking, I care about this work, but I'm really tired. And these experiences are not signs of failure. They are signals from the nervous system that support is needed. Burnout is another concept that overlaps with these experiences. It is typically described as a combination of these three factors: emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, meaning that feeling disconnected from work or clients, and reduced sense of professional accomplishment. Burnout doesn't usually appear overnight. It tends to build gradually. Small stressors accumulate over time. Administrative demands increase, caseloads grow heavier, and eventually the nervous system reaches a point where it needs recovery. So here's something important to remember. Burnout is not simply a personal problem. It's often influenced by systemic factors, things like high caseloads, insurance pressures, documentation demands, lack of supervision support. And addressing burnout requires both individuals and systemic awareness. One concept I find really helpful when thinking about therapist well-being is this. Therapists also have nervous systems, which may sound obvious, but sometimes in professional roles we forget that. Therapists sit with emotional intensity for long periods, and our nervous systems respond to that intensity, even when we are trained and prepared. And this is why many trauma therapists talk about the importance of regulation, not just for clients, but for clinicians too. One way therapists support their own nervous systems is through embodiment. Embodiment practices simply means reconnecting with body awareness, because stress often accumulates in the body. Tension in the shoulders, shallow breathing, fatigue. Embodiment practices can include things like yoga, breath work, meditation, walking in nature, stretching, lifting weights, maybe between sessions. And these practices can help activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is part of the nervous system that is responsible for rest and recovery. When the parasympathetic system activates, the heart rate slows, breathing deepens, and the body begins to relax. Regular embodiment practices help the therapist release the accumulated stress before it becomes overwhelming. Another essential support system for therapists is professional community. Therapy can sometimes feel like very solitary work. A clinician may spend the day moving from one session to the other, but therapists also need spaces where they can reflect, process, and receive support. That is where things like supervision and consultation become incredibly valuable. Supervision allows therapists to discuss very complex cases and emotional reactions with these experienced colleagues. Peer consultation groups create opportunities for therapists to support one another. These conversations help reduce isolation and remind clinicians that you are not alone in navigating the complexities of the therapeutic work. Another practice that many therapists find helpful is personal therapy. Therapists are human beings with their own histories, their own emotions, and stressors, and engaging in therapy allows clinicians to process their own experiences and maintain emotional awareness. Personal therapy can also deepen empathy because sitting in the client's chair provides a perspective on what therapy actually feels like from the other side. One of the most important skills for long-term sustainability in therapy is learning to maintain healthy boundaries. Boundaries might include reasonable caseload sizes, scheduling breaks between sessions, limiting after-hours communication to make space for personal life outside of work. And these boundaries are not selfish, they are necessary. Because when therapists protect their own well-being, they are better able to support the clients. Another important aspect of preventing burnout is reconnecting with the meaning behind the work. Most therapists enter the field because they care. They care deeply about helping people, but during periods of stress, it can be helpful to pause and remember why the work matters. Moments when a client experiences insight, moments when someone feels less alone, moments when healing becomes visible. These moments remind therapists that their work contributes to meaningful change in people's lives. Healing work requires resilience, but resilience does not mean pushing through exhaustion indefinitely. Resilience involves recognizing when rest and support are needed, and therapists who care for their own well-being strengthen the relational foundation that supports effective therapy. Because ultimately, therapy is not just a profession, it's a human relationship, and healthy relationships require both people in the room to be present and supported. Next time, we're going to bring this entire series together. Over the past 40 weeks, we've explored trauma, attachment, identity, culture, ethics, neuroscience, and the future of therapy. And in our final video, we're going to reflect on the central idea that connects all of these topics, which is something surprisingly simple. Healing is relational, and in many ways, love is medicine. I'll see you next time.